this computer. Great. All right. Welcome, Wayne. So I'm here today with Wayne Gilbert. I'm Michael Hobbs, and we're going to dive straight in with some poetry because it's going to kick off this conversation.
All right. Well, good morning, Mike. Good afternoon there, I believe. Yes, I'd like to start our conversation about metaphors and metaphor medicine with this poem, because I think from here, we can branch out into a number of the topics we want to talk about. And it's called Parkinson's is Nothing Like Boxing. The best boxers go into the fight with a plan, but are quick as top jazzers to improvise on the themes that emerge in ring time, always knowing the difference between winning and losing might be a single opportunity or relentless discipline to score lots of small points whose cumulative effects wear down the opponent, add up to the decision. Parkinson's is nothing like boxing. There are no weight divisions, extremely unequal opponents, no rules, no referees, no judges. The bout is not divided into rounds. The bout continues to death. No contract is ever signed. There's no purse. The fight is rigged from the start. There will be no rematches. There will be no long career of exciting contests. No one chooses this fight. There's no pre-fight hoopla, media circus hype. The fight was fixed long before the person with Parkinson's made a fist. Besides, I'm no gym rat, badass brawler. I'm more a duck and cover, run for the hills, avoid pain at all costs, trying to love myself kind of guy. I don't relish making a heavyweight opponent of my own body brain. Parkinson's is not like a fight at all.
I love that one, and I've heard you read that poem before, but it was very, I mean, even hearing it now, there were so many places my mind was going, and that really resonated with me, and things that I didn't even pick up the first time you read it. So thank you for sharing. It was very special.
You bet.
You mentioned body brain. I think it was in the last line.
Mm-hmm.
Can we dive in there?
Sure. You know, I think we have this split historically in philosophy and theology in Western world, at any rate. You know, this whole body-mind kind of split, and somehow eventually the mind got associated with the brain, and then the body stayed kind of separate from that. And it worked its way through and in the religious faiths of the West in particular. And it just is not, it's not the way things are, you know, that somehow we feel as if we experience ourselves almost as if we're these two entities, you know, that I'm this body, I'm this mind inside my body, like a little driver of a machine. And that's kind of the way it feels. And I talk about my body as if it belongs to me. But they're not separate. Mind and body, brain and body, certainly not separate. I mean, Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease that starts in the brain. Maybe everything starts in the brain. I was trying to explain to my wife yesterday how I feel anxiety is different before Parkinson's and after Parkinson's. And in the before Parkinson's anxiety, I felt it was provoked by a reaction, a perception to the environment, something psychological perhaps, or something perhaps traumatic. And that would create this reaction in my brain. Even that's not quite an accurate description. but it's closer. It's close
Mm.
in terms of how it's experienced. With Parkinson's, I feel much more like my brain just starts firing off these waves of anxiety, and then I look for something to attach it to. Or as soon as I pay attention to something, the anxiety goes right into it, rather than the other way around.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't, but that's not the way. But even there, it's hard to talk about. Eventually, you come back to, well, in either case, it's still the brain and the chemistry, the neurochemistry, biochemistry. I mean, I'm a poet and a former English teacher. I'm not a scientist, but although the experience may feel something like that, it's just not accurate. I can't. In the end, I come back to, where is the line between us? There is no us. The body and the brain are one. And that's been one of the major lessons for me of Parkinson's, is that I can't really peel them apart. The first question I asked after diagnosis was, wow, if I'm not my body, who am I? Well, the answer to that question is no one, nobody. And if you pose the question in that way, and that's where metaphors, I think, come in, that metaphors allow you to pose different kinds of questions.
And how do you relate to no body?
Wow.
I'm just thinking.
Okay, say a little more.
Because in the way that, I mean, I agree with you. And, you said that the first question you had is, if I'm not my body, who or what am I? And then your second question was, if I am primarily my body, then who will I be as this condition progresses? And so it's like that life of sitting with that tension of, we are a body, but there's still something about cognition and consciousness that there's still a degree of spaciousness there, or separation. So it's like, how do we hold both of those things simultaneously, that I am a body and that I have a body? Right. And so I was just wondering, I suppose that's what I was getting at, is that your no body? That kind of spaciousness place? Or
I mean, we're in the depths of centuries old discussion here already.
I know. We jumped right in.
Well, it does feel like there's this choice that has to be made between, if I'm a materialist and I'm only a body, then I'm just a collection of physical interactions, molecules and atoms and chemistry and all of that sort of thing. But if I'm this other thing, cognition, consciousness, well, where is it? Where does it live? But I will, and then you just kind of, like, I think, end up sort of chasing your tail around that way. So I guess, if philosophically speaking, I sometimes think of myself as, an existentialist mystic, or a mystical existentialist. I'm not sure which. That somehow in the experience, there's more of a unity of consciousness and physicality, if you will. That embodiment, cognition is part of embodiment. Is the other true? Is embodiment a part of cognition? Again, I'm no logician, but my experience says, yes.
Yes, I really agree. I think that there is no duality between the two. And I know I think of my cognition as incorporating my body and everything that comes in to contact with that, or awareness with that. And interestingly for me, my anxiety is very body based, because I mean, my main kind of chronic health issue is my gut, and that's playing up today. And it's very interesting to notice that the anxiety for me is, majority of the time, secondary to the gut playing up. and then it does that thing where it's looking for something to attach the anxiety to. But I know that for me, it's because my gut's inflamed and flaring up, and then I haven't slept well, and then because I'm trying to then regulate my gut, that adds like this extra layer of stress, because I feel like I should be more on top of it. But it's very body based for me. So I really resonated when you were talking about the kind of different experiences of anxiety, and how it could either be something outside triggering it, or something inside triggering it, that then it's then trying to attach something to, trying to attach to something.
And in one case, we think we can look for the cause. Okay?
Yes.
Like, oh, it's my gut, or
Yeah.
oh, I'm denying, that a good friend is very ill and I'm worried about him.
Yeah.
And I don't want to think about that right now.
Yeah.
And so I push that away, and anxiety comes when I get close to remembering, or something makes me think of him, and I get upset then. And anxiety kicks up in order to close that denial door. But do you hear all the metaphors we're using? You know, even level, layers, and regulation, and
Yes.
doors, and all of these are all metaphors talking.
Yes.
That's not what's happened. That's not what's literally happening on one, in scientifically speaking, or under the electron microscope, or however these things are explored, you know?
Yeah.
But so what we're really talking about is our experience of them.
Yes.
And in order to do that, we have to use metaphors. I just don't think ultimately there's any way around it, if we want to get at, well, what do they mean, and what do we do with them, and how do we live? Well, you know, I got in a very small argument with a scientist recently about some research and metaphorical language, and he made the statement about, well, metaphors are fine, but they keep us from understanding the what was the phrase he used?
It's like the true nature or something
Of the real thing. Yeah, like somehow a metaphor is an obstacle between understanding and the real thing, or a lens, or some way of not seeing the true thing. And I just think that's completely mistaken, because it's the metaphor is the mediator of that real thing. And it's certainly the only way I can share my experience of it with you. Trying to tell someone who's never experienced freezing as in the Parkinson's sense. See, even a major symptom of Parkinson's is strictly a metaphor, freezing.
Yes.
It doesn't have anything to do with the cold. It has to do with stiffness and rigidity, and it's really painful, and that provokes a great deal of anxiety, etc. But it's really difficult to explain to somebody what that feels like, from if they can only see it happening, or they can't see anything happening. So a metaphor, I think, is really the only way to sort of glide us toward one another, and glide us both to that original experience, if you will. Otherwise, we just remain completely isolated, or we have to use this super specialized language that no one else really understands, or continue to look at smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, aspects of things. And how is that less obstructive than a metaphor? You know, when you continue to look at smaller and smaller pieces of something that is a whole, that's not the real thing either. Does that make sense, Mike?
Absolutely. And I think that point that you made, which I hadn't thought about in these terms, but the metaphor as a bridge between two people, or a connector to actually, you know, as a very crucial part of empathy almost, and actually understanding someone else's experience. I hadn't thought of that in that way before, but I really agree. And I think the funny thing is that to that scientist's comment is that science is actually, there's so much metaphor through science, but it's so ingrained that people often miss it. And even as they go smaller and smaller and smaller, all the ways that they're describing the mechanisms is still so bound in metaphor. And actually, a lot of the time, as they get more smaller, because they're going more abstract, they actually need to rely on metaphor even more, because there's no real, it's really hard to describe otherwise. Even the whole idea of DNA and RNA being like lock and key, all of that stuff is a metaphor, and it frames not just how we communicate something, but also how we then look at the science and analyze the science.
Yeah. And it's astonishing that, to me, that, well, as I taught literature for years and years and years, and of course we read poetry and we studied short stories and novels and plays, and one of the things I often taught was metaphor or metaphorical language or figurative language, and we're so used to not noticing them. The controlling metaphors of our culture and our language are so embedded in the way we understand things that we are not even conscious of them, but we can become conscious of them. And once we do, that's why I wanted to start with the boxing poem, because that oppositional, the oppositional setup between two boxers is completely artificial. Every dichotomy is a false dichotomy in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's not a you against me or a me against you. It's not an against at all. Again, it kind of feels that way. There's something resisting me, perhaps. But it's so natural. All the language of illness and disease, I certainly in Western culture, in my culture, in my language, is all couched in terms of fighting and battles and all this war language that we even have trouble thinking outside of it. When you start to examine it, it falls apart, and it's not a helpful language or metaphor system, because it breaks down. Every metaphor breaks down, but the metaphors of war break down so quickly. There's only two options: you can win or lose. Well, in Parkinson's, it's a setup. You know you're going to lose. That's the nature of the game. If it's a game, it's got to be some other kind of game where there are many more possibilities than just win or lose.
And so, what's your experience as someone with Parkinson's when you hear that kind of language?
You know, now, honestly, it infuriates me because it just leaves people so few alternatives. There aren't enough variations in that language to account for the variations in the experience of Parkinson's. You know, among parties, there's the saying, if you know one person with Parkinson's, you know one person with Parkinson's, meaning it's so different for everyone. And while that's true, it's also different for me day in and day out. I never know for sure which symptoms are going to act up when. I don't know if by the end of the day, how much variation in symptoms and symptom intensity I will have experienced, and that kind of variation just can't be accounted for in battle, in fight. At least not that language all alone. Now, some people find it useful in order to, like, you know, get psyched up and oh man, that just wears me out. And I always feel like there's a Well, I'll be frank.
Mm.
I think denial is behind most of the fight language, war language.
Mm.
And by that, I mean, it enables us to somehow pretend that rallying the troops will make a difference in the long run. It may in the very short run, but in the long run, it won't. You can't last. The other thing I think is that level of violence that we internalize
Mm.
is also sick.
Mm.
Brings us even more dis-ease.
Mm.
I've lived in a war culture all my life. I was born in 1950. Just barely, World War II was just barely over and the Korean War was about to start. My dad served in 3 wars. There's not been a time in my lifetime beyond a few months here and there where my country wasn't at war with someone. And that's not good for us. My body's not a war zone.
Mm.
And to take all that kind of violence in and assume that that's some kind of heroic strategy for dealing with a life, basing your entire life on a kind of language of violence, I think is, well, I just think it's morally at least doomed. And at bottom, it's a lie, and it harms us. So that I like to search for more compassionate, not easy, for sure, but more compassionate language and metaphors that incorporate both the variation and variety of life with a chronic condition, especially pain, and identity and mobility issues, but also helps us bring out of ourselves and back into ourselves more of a life of compassion and caring. You know, if my grandson, someone I love, comes to me and says, you know, they hurt, and they're really suffering from some experience or another, I never say, you know, well, suck it up. What's your problem? Tough it out, grow up, be a man, be a whatever. No, we talk, what's going on? How can I help? Right? And I think that's a much healthier, more meaningful approach. And the great and poetry comes in because it allows us, it insists on exploring all kinds of metaphors. You can't just settle for one narrow little metaphor system and read and write and share poetry. You just can't. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Or really boring. I guess maybe even Rudyard Kipling, you know, the ultimate imperialist poet, still had a much broader range than that. So yeah, there are other metaphors I prefer for embodiment and for that. I guess that's the other thing I'll say, Mike, and that is the wholeness to which we were referring before. There are metaphors that engage and embrace wholeness more than that oppositional conflict metaphor. Dance, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, I think, actually, I want to ask you, why do you think, because, you know, Susan Sontag wrote about kind of metaphor in medicine, and people have been writing about it for quite a while in terms of particularly this war metaphor. Like, metaphors also have a use by date, and that one has definitely well worn through its use by date. What do you think are some of the challenges to actually, you mentioned denial, And so I'm wondering, what do you think the actual challenge is to changing some of the languages are? Is it also because we've dichotomized poetry from medicine? Is it denial on the practitioners as well as the patients? What are some of the challenges in actually changing that?
Wow. Well, for one thing, is to get that we simply are not trained to recognize metaphors and metaphorical language in our own everyday usage. And once you begin to notice it, it's an assignment I used to love to give, is, just start eavesdropping on conversations and start listing the metaphors you hear. And it takes practice, but it's pretty remarkable. So that's one thing, especially people who sort of pride themselves on, their technical prowess or their scientific clarity and acuity.
Because they'll miss it?
Because they miss it. Yeah. I mean, and they're not used to hearing it either. In a good therapist is like highly skilled in recognizing metaphors, because those are the metaphors, those are the places where we reveal so much, and where you can keep exploring, because a good metaphor just kind of keeps opening up. The more you explore it for a while, the richer it is. So I think that's one difficulty, is none of us are used to really recognizing them. And the other difficulty is, man, we have a lot invested in violence and war and victory, and the champion, the one who overcame, the heroes and sheroes, who my wife is disabled. She has an artificial leg, and she's always used the term among people with physical disabilities, a super crip. And the super crip is someone who is held out as this, the epitome, the example, the exemplar of all things disabled. And you should be able to climb Mount Everest as a blind man with an artificial leg,
I see. Yes.
Or become an Olympic champion. Anyone can do it. You see how hard I worked, and it's just not true.
Well, it's just kind of rewriting the ableist narrative over the whole disability community.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the pressure that puts on people, sometimes Michael J. Fox in the Parkinson's community feels a lot like that. Smile, be optimistic. We're going to find a cure. 5 years. Well, I've been diagnosed for 17 and a half years, and it's been 5 years, away all those years.
Yes.
And his optimism is sometimes inspiring, but often just like nauseating, because it feels like so much pressure. I don't always feel that way.
Yes.
And it feels like that's the value that I should be achieving, the standard I should be performing at. And I can't. So I'm obviously a loser, lightweight, and I can't possibly live up to Michael J. Fox. So I think that's another part of it, is that we have internalized so deeply. We have so much invested in the dominant metaphors of our culture that it is literally almost impossible to think outside of them. Or if they get challenged, the reaction is so often, well, what else is there? Let me show you how we can find them. Oh, I can't write poetry. Like, everyone can write poetry. Everyone is a poet. Will you be read, and are you Shakespeare or Walt Whitman or Emily Dickinson? Okay, maybe not. But everyone is a poet. And that's, so there's also that resistance to the arts, to creativity, to releasing that kind of energy in your own body and in your own mind. See, I can't even avoid it myself. So
It's,
those are three elements. What do you think are some of the?
I mean, I resonate with everything that you said. I mean, so, you know, I come from being a healthcare practitioner background, and I own a clinic in Sydney, and I, writing and poetry really was the balm, I feel, that saved me from complete burnouts. And a lot of it on reflection now is looking back and seeing how that language and that whole metaphor of fighting the good fight, being in the trenches, was embedded in amongst myself and all my healthcare practitioners as well. And we also couldn't escape it. And it almost became this weird identity thing where, you know, if I was working through lunch, and you know, it comes from a good place because you do want to help people. It's really painful to be across the room from people who are in pain. But also it got to this point where, you know, I was working through lunch and I had no needs left. Like, I was never satisfying my needs because I was always working and fighting the good fight. And I held that up as a respectable thing to do as a member of this society. And it led to my burnout. And so I think that there's also, the language needs to also come from healthcare practitioners doing some introspective work on themselves, because the truth is a lot of people get into the healthcare profession because they genuinely want to help people. And I've mentored enough healthcare practitioners, I've met enough healthcare practitioners to say that as a collective of people, the flip side is we're all extremely bad with sitting across from someone in pain or disappointing someone. And so we do whatever we can to try and make it all comfortable. And very often we run away from nuance or ambiguity for that reason. And so we think that we're avoiding metaphorical language and being really explicit and direct. And, you know, that's going to, by being black and white, that's providing a level of certainty. But the reality is scientific language isn't very transparent. Most patients don't really know what it means. So it's not really as transparent as we might think it is. It's actually quite opaque. And a lot of the time, just because you've told someone directly, oh, we don't know where this disease has originated from, that's only fulfilling our comfort as the provider in a way, because the patient still has to grapple with the ambiguity of what that means for their life. And so we need we need to be working with metaphors, and we need to be inventing language with the patients to help make more space for dealing with the tension of the ambiguity and of this kind of ambivalence about things, and the humanity, making room for more humanity of things too.
Totally. One of the common topics of conversation in the Parkinson's community, or in small groups of people with Parkinson's when we get together on Zoom or in person, is, you know, how our doctors usually don't have a clue. They might know a ton of things about Parkinson's and neurology and all that sort of thing, and they like to throw you know, their 10 years of medical school and their 5 years of residency and their fellowships and, you know, their certificates. And I sound sarcastic, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to downplay that. All of that is very valuable. I'm a big believer in education, but
it's not lived experience.
It's not the same as, yes, exactly. And neurologists will say things to you. For instance, a neurologist a couple of years ago, pain has been a constant part of my Parkinson's, just constant chronic pain. It's not the same intensity all the time, but 24/7, it's always there. And I had a neurologist tell me that pain is not part of Parkinson's. I was like, just look it up on the internet, for God's sake. I mean,
yeah.
Come on. When were you in medical school? How long ago was that? It's absurd. Of course it's a part of it. And probably other neurologists would be embarrassed by that comment. Nevertheless, it's an example of the kind of thing that we often, it's not on the checklist, and it
Yeah.
doesn't, I don't have a protocol for that. So it doesn't exist. And it's probably, that's probably, you need to see a psychotherapist because it's all in your head. And we're back to the mind-body problem.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, I just happen to have here, it's too long. I won't read it all now, but I'll start. It's called A Poem for My Doctors.
Great.
I know you mean well. You want to help me. You probably have some actual interest in my life on this planet. How I came to be here just now in your office, angry and scared. I am always angry and scared in your office. If only the company permitted actual acquaintance, real engagement. Alas, you have time constraints, rigid protocols, required data entries, your own narrow specialty. I can hardly become much more than a bit player in the epic cinematic drama, that's a metaphor, in which you are both superstar and director, and me, a small-time actor, refuses to recite the lines assigned at check-in. Ha, ha, ha. I always come at you with a script of my own, and nowadays an advocate too, who has no other interest than mine. I remember stupid ranting parents who believed they knew something about teaching because they were once in the 3rd grade, learning cursive arithmetic. Tell me how to do my job, so I know it must be hard for you after a decade or more of intense training, which, by the way, is a process I distinguish from getting an education, meaning no disrespect. Your pride is both evident and deserved. To sit across from an inarticulate complainer with reams of pages printed from websites do not offer pure, peer-reviewed research after you studied so long, so hard to pass all the exams required to practice in America. I salute your achievements. However, your accomplishments do not change the simple existential fact. This body is mine. This body is me. So much so, I cannot make the Cartesian bifurcation your profession presumes, my homunculus operator reporting on the state of the machinery. We are me, this one organic oneness, not torn from each other like once conjoined twins, but a unity, far beyond the convenience of duality, etc. You get the drift, I think.
I haven't heard that one. I love that poem.
I like it too.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're
it's
welcome.
Very powerful.
It's so often that we feel our experience is discounted, and and how rare it is at, say, a conference or a symposium to have actual, on Parkinson's disease, for instance, to have actual people with Parkinson's there to share their experience. My experience is data, you know? I'm like the case manager of me. I'm the one who has to put it all together. Well, I can't do it by myself because I have Parkinson's, which means my brain is a little messed up. So I have a care team that supports me, but fundamentally, it ends up being up to me to coordinate all these different doctors and treatments and healthcare, other healthcare professionals for in my best interest. There's no job training for that other than living with it for a long time and taking responsibility. And I know of people, of course, who just do everything they're told and take, I have a friend who takes over 18 prescription medications a day. That's the number of individual drugs. That's not how many pills he actually takes. And for instance, and anyway, it's important to us that we be heard. I don't expect to, there are things I know I don't know, and there are things I don't even know I don't know, for sure. But I do know my experience and my body, and that's rarely interrogated. That's the wrong word.
it's rarely consulted in the consulting room almost.
Thank you.
I'm very moved by that, by you know, how you just read that whole poem, and also how you just said, I do know my own body, because I feel like there's so many obstacles in our society in the way that tell us you don't know your own body, and don't believe your symptoms, don't believe what's necessarily coming up for you. Has that been a journey to kind of listen to that knowing?
Oh, for sure. Oh man. First of all, I'm I'm an academic, and originally, and I sort of lived from my neck up. I have my best friend and I talk often about how most of our adult lives we sort of lived in our heads, in the realm of ideas and discussions and books and all that sort of thing. And then as we aged and things began to happen to us, like, oh my gosh, I have a body. How did that happen? Whoa. And not used to listening to it at all. Funny, because I said to one of my nieces who danced professionally for a while, I said, wow, as a dancer, you're really lucky, because I mean, you've just had to really be aware of your body, and I've had to learn how to do that. And she said, no way. She said, I had to learn how to stop paying attention to my body because I had to perform like an athlete with injuries. And if I paid attention, I wouldn't be able to do it. I just had to live with all these aches and pains. Like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. So yeah, for sure. Here's a quick poem about one of the ways I did that.
Great.
At first, my arms, shoulders, hips, legs, feet creaked, tensed, braced for impact. But they knew what was coming. Reminded chest and belly to breathe, big sloppy round breaths, clear cleanse myelin sheaths, switch on the inner amp for Brubeck, Beyonce, Michael J, Lady Day, warming, softening, stretching, expanding each muscle fiber, swelling with blood, charged, synced for movement. Gradually, incrementally, lean, bend, rotate, lean, bend, rotate, roll slowly up. First in chairs, then on our feet, statues coming to life. Step, touch, grapevine left, grapevine right, slip, step, slide, And we were ready, gathered on one side of the studio to dance. All the way across and all the way back, again and again and again, until I dropped, laughing and sweating on the bench, a man with a whole body again. There's that wholeness thing in there too. And so I use dance as one of the primary ways, or dance used me as one of the primary ways to like explore my body. And that's still happening because everything changes. And during the pandemic, everything changed, not just in the world around me, but in this body. So during that time, I had 2 surgeries and sat a lot and didn't go out at all. And so many things that people with Parkinson's, the opposite of what we're supposed to do in terms of things that are good for us. And so now we danced throughout the pandemic, but on Zoom in our own homes. And that was better than nothing. But as things changed, again, that's one of the richness of dance as a metaphor, is that it stretches and accounts for variations and allows explorations that that respond to the varieties and variations and changes in one's experience.
Mm. Yeah, I was just thinking as you read that, like, because dance is a very important part of my life too, and it's like, well, what would it be if it was, a holding metaphor rather than the war thing, and thinking about, what we're talking about, the stretching, the kind of that wholeness, and that the whole body in the moment. But there's also this element of, it's not a race, it's about timing, and it's about right action, right time.
Yes. Well, and we even say, because this is, I dance in a class and with a troupe. We do shows too of people mostly with Parkinson's. Not everyone has Parkinson's, but our purpose isn't to be, precise, technical, highly trained dancers. Our purpose is to dance. So every time we dance together, we are always reminded, listen to your body. If your body can't take it, if you can't take your arms all the way up to the top over your head, don't do that. Do this. Or if you can't do, if you can only go this much instead of, this much, then do that. And so it's this constant within ourselves. We are also dancing with ourselves quite literally in this a way of awareness. Meanwhile, we're listening to music. We're in a room with other dancers. It's not a competition. No one wins or loses. We get a gold star for showing up. That's another of our little phrases we use. And you do it. And it's fun and delightful, and we laugh and have a good time, and we become a real tight-knit community as a result. And it's not the kind of community that soldiers on the battlefield or
has an enemy that you're fighting. It's about co-creation.
That's right. That's right. We're making something. We're not destroying something.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's much more powerful and meaningful than this idea of having to put something down.
Yes.
And even that, put something down. I guess that maybe that's not necessarily more metaphorical, but I've been reading the book you mentioned, the 1980 book, Metaphors We Live By. And
what do you think?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's like right on. Yeah, the up and down. I mean, those two authors are getting down to like the really basic.
Yes.
And I'm starting to believe that maybe conversation language is impossible without metaphors.
I think it might be.
I think it might be too. I do too.
And I think those metaphors that the book, George Lakoff, and I can't remember the other author's name, but they're so embodied, like they're the very embodied essence of like how we experience the world, which is, I think, another power of metaphor, is that it's like, it's very close to the like a real lived experience, much closer than a lot of other language. But I don't think language necessarily would be possible without metaphor, in my personal opinion.
I think I agree too, which I think might put off some of your medical and healthcare professionals a bit there.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking of how to sort of bring it back to that kind of an audience. And
yes.
And I think a consciousness or an awareness, that's a better word, an awareness of metaphorical language will increase the capacity of a professional to talk to a patient. By virtue of giving the professional a fuller range of language to talk about the patient's experience or the professional's observations or insights regarding the patient. And a metaphorical language that isn't too technical can make what the professional is trying to say and represent more accessible to the patient as well.
Mm.
It might feel initially lazy to a professional, but to a patient, it will sound like such a relief, even if it's presenting, quote, bad news, unquote, to use a metaphor. Even if it's something that the professional does not really want to tell the patient, but the patient may not want to hear, but desperately wants to know.
Mm.
Metaphors can be the mediator in the consulting room too, especially if they're carefully presented and shaped and according to this patient's needs and life stories and all of that sort of thing.
Well, and I think a lot of it comes, sorry to interrupt.
No, let's go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of it comes down to listening to the language the patient is using as well, and actually reflecting some of that language back at them. So for example, if I had an engineer with back pain, I might talk about the spine being like a bridge, and, you know, talk about it in engineering terms or language that they've reflected to me. Or even people will hint via metaphor how they're processing what you're saying. Like they might say, oh, I'm feeling what you're saying, or I'm resonating with what you're saying, or like, oh yeah, I can see that, or oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And it all kind of clues you into how they're interpreting or not what you're saying, that you can then shape the language towards as well.
Agreed. Yeah. Yes, I think, and that makes what you just said makes it a conversation, doesn't it?
Yes.
And less a tutorial.
Yes. Yes.
And or a sort of humble acceptance of information I don't even understand.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. It really humanizes the relationship in that way as well. I like the notion of sort of exploring, jointly exploring metaphors in that way. If you really try to, if we were better at recognizing metaphors, we'd be better at communication, because we would pick up on those that the other uses, and then you can begin to explore what's loaded into a metaphor. Every metaphor is just loaded. And the misconception is that somehow a metaphor is just this sort of simple, a flower is just, a rose is a rose by any other name. Well, that is utter nonsense. That smells real bad.
Yes.
Rose is never just a rose, not ever. Every psychotherapist knows that. Everyone who takes Psychology 101 knows that. Please.
Yeah.
So how do you begin exploring it? Well, you begin exploring it by asking questions, or looking at a rose and what are its parts? What does it do? What does it remind you of? And lo and behold, a rose is not, after all, a rose. Dance is not a metaphor, and dance is a metaphor. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I think dance holds together. Where we started was this notion of, the embodiment, the mind and the body, or the brain and the body, whatever dichotomy, however you wanted to pose that dichotomy. Dance holds it together. In it, as a metaphor, it works to present a whole human being. That whole human being, to whatever extent he or she can possibly be engaged, is engaged in dance right now. Yeah. Well, I wanted to close with a poem. I think we're out of time, though.
Damn, it always goes so quickly when I'm talking with you.
I know, it flew by, didn't it? Well, I'll just close with this then. My favorite metaphor of all,
yes,
is jazz. Okay.
Jazz. Okay, amazing.
Is jazz, and jazz just has never failed me as a metaphor, or almost never. I can't think of a time anyway. I circle back to jazz all the time. Because in jazz, you know, you got to improvise and listen. You got to incorporate and integrate, listen, feel deeply, play and listen. You have to feel, you have to use the space and find the space and make the space. And you have to notice the way notes build and the way notes fall apart and run together and make a phrase and anticipate and incorporate. And you have to use your body, because your body is what makes the sound, except that it's your body in connection with this other thing, this instrument. So your body is both instrument and instrument holder, instrument player, all of this. It's just like, and when you're improvising and it's really working, you're in this flow that you're not really thinking in the usual sense. You're not problem solving. You're in the moment, totally in the moment. And yet you have this sense of what's going to happen next before it happens. And you're building on everything that came before, and you're shaping it and reshaping it the way water moves where it wants to go, always, no matter the pain, you play that. No matter the suffering, you play that. No matter the despair, anxiety, you play that. All the ways you hurt, you play that. And the little things that bring you pleasure and joy, you play that. And you feel it and you play. Jazz, you just play. You jam. Jazz is for everybody.
Woo! I think that's a great note to leave it on.
It's been a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you. You're very inspiring to me.
Oh, thank you. Back at you. Yeah, it's really good to talk with someone who gets it, all of it, the arts and the embodiment and the scientific and the, yeah. I appreciate you a lot.
I don't think I've got anything yet, but I'm curious, right? It's an ongoing exploration, and
yeah, that's what you get.
Yeah, and you know, I think poetry is such a magical place for that, because it's the place to develop your own language, right? And use it as your own technology. So yeah. But this is great. So yeah, we'll talk soon. I'm off to Mexico tonight, and
safe journey.
Thank you. And we'll get cracking on a journal.
All right. Take care of yourself, my friend.
Thanks, Wayne.
I look forward to our next conversation, and to continue these conversations, and yeah, to work on that journal.
Yes, me too. Very much so.
All right.
Take care.
Later. Peace.
Bye.